May 22nd, 1941, North Atlantic, 400 miles west of Brest, France. Admiral Günther Lütjens stood on the bridge of the Bismarck, the pride of the German Kriegsmarine and the most powerful battleship in the world. Through his binoculars, he scanned the empty horizon, satisfied that they had successfully evaded the British pursuers. After sinking the HMS Hood, pride of the Royal Navy, 3 days earlier, Bismarck and the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen had executed a series of complex maneuvers specifically designed to lose their pursuers. "We have done it," Lütjens remarked to Captain Ernst Lindemann. "The British have lost us completely." His confidence was not unfounded. Bismarck's sophisticated radar had detected no aircraft or ships. The weather had cooperated, providing foggy conditions that limited visibility. Most importantly, every movement of the German battle group had been communicated using the Enigma encryption system, a device the Germans considered mathematically unbreakable. What Lütjens couldn't know was that at that precise moment, in a Victorian mansion 80 miles northwest of London, a mathematician named Alan Turing was analyzing the decrypted text of Lütjens' own messages to Berlin. Every position report, every course change, every plan to rendezvous with U-boats for escort into Brest, all were being read by the British almost as soon as they were transmitted. The mathematical certainty upon which German naval security rested, that Enigma's 159 million possible settings made it impervious to cryptanalysis, had been systematically undermined by a team of British mathematicians, linguists and chess champions working in absolute secrecy at Bletchley Park. This moment, when German confidence in their communication security collided with the reality of British code-breaking success, would transform the nature of warfare itself. The mathematics of cryptography had become as decisive as the mathematics of firepower, and Admiral Lütjens was sailing into a trap laid by an enemy who could read his every intention. 8 hours later, a Catalina flying boat from RAF Coastal Command spotted the Bismarck exactly where Bletchley Park had calculated she would be. Within 24 hours, the most powerful battleship in the German fleet would lie at the bottom of the Atlantic, victim of a new kind of warfare in which breaking codes proved as deadly as breaking hulls. The transformation from confidence to catastrophe would unfold over the next 3 years, as German forces across all theaters of war gradually realized that their most secret communications were being systematically compromised. The revelation would come too late to prevent the strategic defeat that inevitably followed. The roots of this intelligence revolution reached back to well before the war began. In the years following World War I, Germany had developed the Enigma machine as a commercial encryption device for businesses seeking to protect sensitive communications. The German military, recognizing its potential, adopted modified versions for Army, Navy, and Air Force use beginning in the late 1920s. The Enigma machine represented a quantum leap in encryption technology. Unlike traditional codes and ciphers, which relied on fixed substitution patterns, Enigma generated an ever-changing encryption scheme. Each keystroke caused the machine's rotors to advance, creating a new substitution alphabet for the next letter. With multiple rotors, a plugboard that further scrambled connections, and daily changes to settings, the theoretical number of possible configurations was astronomical. Approximately 159 quintillion different settings. German cryptographers had calculated that even if an enemy possessed an actual Enigma machine, trying all possible settings would require far more time than the universe had existed. This mathematical certainty formed the bedrock of German communication security strategy throughout the war. What they hadn't counted on was the combined intellectual firepower of Poland, France, and Britain, and particularly the revolutionary thinking of a British mathematician who approached the problem from an entirely different angle. As early as 1932, Polish mathematicians Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Różycki, and Henryk Zygalski had begun working on methods to break Enigma. Their approach combined mathematical analysis with mechanical computing devices they called bombas, early specialized machines designed to test multiple Enigma settings rapidly. The Polish breakthrough came through mathematical analysis rather than brute force. Rejewski discovered that by analyzing patterns in message headers, certain relationships could be established that dramatically reduced the number of settings to be tested. By 1938, the Poles could regularly read German Enigma messages, but the Germans continued to enhance Enigma security, adding rotors and changing procedures. Just before Poland fell to German invasion, Polish cryptographers shared everything they knew with French and British intelligence services, including replicas of the Enigma machine they had reconstructed through mathematical analysis alone. This transfer of knowledge in July 1939, just weeks before World War II began, would prove to be one of the most significant intelligence coups in military history. Without the Polish foundation, British code-breaking efforts might have taken years longer to succeed. September 4, 1939. Bletchley Park, Buckinghamshire, England. Alan Turing arrived at the sprawling Victorian estate that would become Britain's code-breaking headquarters. The 39-acre site had been requisitioned by the Government Code and Cipher School, GCNCS, as a wartime location away from London. What began with a few dozen cryptanalysts would eventually grow into a massive operation employing nearly 10,000 people. Turing, a Cambridge mathematician known for his groundbreaking theoretical work on computability, had been recruited for his exceptional analytical abilities. Socially awkward, but intellectually brilliant, he brought a perspective to cryptanalysis that would prove revolutionary. Rather than approaching Enigma as a classical cipher problem, Turing conceptualized it as a mathematical challenge that could be solved through mechanized logical processes. Building on the Polish work, but taking it in entirely new directions, he began designing a machine that could automate the testing of Enigma settings at unprecedented speed. The result was the Bombe, an electromechanical device that embodied Turing's theoretical insights into practical form. The first British bomb, named Victory, began operation in March 1940. By year's end, several were in service, each capable of testing thousands of potential Enigma settings in minutes rather than the years it would take human computers. The British code-breaking effort differed from earlier cryptanalytic work in its industrial scale and systematic approach. Bletchley Park organized its operations into sections called huts, each focusing on different aspects of Axis communications. Hut 8, where Turing worked, concentrated on German naval Enigma, which used additional security features that made it particularly challenging. The system that emerged combined mathematical brilliance with industrialized processes. Intercepted Enigma messages were collected by a vast network of listening stations across Britain called Y stations. These encrypted texts were then transported to Bletchley Park, where analysts looked for patterns, identified likely cribs, guessed portions of plaintext, and used the bombs to test possible solutions. This approach required not just cutting-edge technology, but an unprecedented concentration of intellectual talent. Bletchley recruited mathematicians, linguists, chess champions, crossword experts, and classicists, anyone with exceptional pattern recognition abilities and analytical minds. Among them were many women, who constituted roughly 75% of the workforce at Bletchley Park. The challenge they faced seemed insurmountable at first. Naval Enigma added a fourth rotor to the standard three-rotor Army and Air Force version, exponentially increasing the number of possible settings. Furthermore, German U-boats used especially stringent security procedures with specialized codebooks. Progress came slowly. Throughout 1940 and early 1941, Bletchley Park experienced alternating periods of success and failure as German procedures changed and security tightened. The critical breakthrough for naval Enigma came through a combination of mathematical insight and captured materials. In February 1941, the British captured a German weather ship, the Münchener, recovering Enigma codebooks and settings. In May, they captured a U-boat, U-110, with its Enigma machine and current codebooks intact. These physical materials, combined with Turing's analytical approaches, finally cracked the naval Enigma system consistently. The timing proved pivotal. Just as the British achieved this breakthrough, the Battle of the Atlantic, the struggle to maintain the maritime supply lines that kept Britain alive, was reaching its most critical phase. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the German U-boat fleet, had developed the Wolfpack tactic to devastating effect. Groups of submarines would coordinate their attacks on Allied convoys, overwhelming escorts and sinking merchant ships in shocking numbers. Between January and June 1941, U-boats sank over 700 Allied ships, totaling more than 3 million tons. These coordinated attacks depended entirely on radio communications. Dönitz directed his submarines from headquarters, positioning them based on intelligence reports and convoy sightings. U-boat commanders communicated their locations, fuel states, and contact reports, all encrypted using naval Enigma. German naval leadership had absolute confidence in Enigma's security. Admiral Dönitz stated in his standing orders, "The security of our operational codes and ciphers is beyond question. No enemy can read our communications." This certainty led to extensive, detailed radio communications that provided Bletchley Park with abundant material for cryptanalysis. The breaking of naval Enigma transformed the Battle of the Atlantic almost immediately. By mid-1941, convoys could be routed around known U-boat concentrations. Hunter-killer groups could be dispatched precisely where submarines were operating. The strategic advantage shifted dramatically, though the Germans remained unaware that their communications had been compromised. May 23, 1941. Admiralty War Room, London. First Sea Lord Sir Dudley Pound studied the plot showing Bismarck's position, derived directly from decrypted Enigma transmissions. After nearly losing contact with Germany's most powerful battleship, the Royal Navy now knew exactly where to find her. "It's extraordinary," Admiral Pound remarked to his staff. 24 hours ago, we had lost her completely. Now we know not only her position, but her intended route and destination." The hunting of the Bismarck demonstrated the decisive impact of signals intelligence. After sinking HMS Hood on May 24th, Bismarck and Prince Eugen separated, with the battleship making for the French port of Brest for repairs. A combination of bad weather and skillful seamanship allowed Bismarck to shake off British pursuers. Under normal circumstances, the massive battleship might have disappeared into the vastness of the Atlantic, but Enigma decrypts revealed her position, course, and speed. On May 26th, Swordfish torpedo bombers from the carrier HMS Ark Royal damaged Bismarck's rudder, leaving her unable to maneuver effectively. The following morning, British battleships HMS King George V and HMS Rodney closed in for the kill. The sinking of Bismarck demonstrated the new mathematics of naval warfare. Traditional calculations of firepower, armor, and speed were now subordinate to the cryptographic equations being solved at Bletchley Park. Admiral Lütjens had believed himself secure in both his vessel's physical armor and his communications mathematical armor. Both had failed catastrophically. The Germans, however, did not immediately connect the loss of Bismarck to a compromise of Enigma. They attributed it to operational errors, bad luck, and the overwhelming concentration of British naval assets. This failure to recognize the true source of their vulnerability would prove costly as the war progressed. The year 1941 marked the turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic, though the impact of Enigma decryption, codenamed ultra-intelligence, wouldn't be fully realized until 1942 and beyond. The Germans continued to make modifications to Enigma, particularly the introduction of the four-rotor naval Enigma machine in February 1942, which temporarily blinded Bletchley Park. Turing and his colleagues responded with further innovations, both mathematical and technological. More powerful bombs were designed, new analytical techniques were developed. The code-breaking operation expanded dramatically, with thousands of personnel working in round-the-clock shifts to process the torrent of intercepted messages. When the Germans made Enigma more complex, the British responded with more sophisticated code-breaking technology. It became a mathematical arms race, one that the Germans didn't even know they were fighting, which ensured their ultimate defeat. June 12, 1942, U-Boat Command Headquarters, Kerneville, France. Admiral Karl Dönitz studied the disturbing statistics before him. Over the past 3 months, 29 U-boats had been lost, an unprecedented casualty rate. More alarmingly, many had been sunk in areas where no Allied convoys had been reported, suggesting that hunter-killer groups were somehow finding submarines operating independently. "It's as though they can see us through the water," remarked his Chief of Staff, Captain Eberhard Gott. Dönitz considered the possibilities. Allied radar was improving, but it couldn't account for submarines being located in open ocean. New direction-finding equipment might explain some losses, but not the precision with which Allied forces were targeting U-boat patrol lines and refueling rendezvous points. The most disturbing possibility that Enigma had been compromised was dismissed almost immediately. German cryptanalysts had repeatedly assured naval leadership that the mathematical complexity of Enigma, combined with strict operational procedures, made decryption impossible. "The security of our ciphers is absolute," Dönitz wrote in his war diary that evening. "We must look elsewhere for the source of our losses." This failure to recognize the compromise of Enigma represents one of the most consequential intelligence blind spots in military history. The Germans continued to trust implicitly in the mathematical security of their encryption system, while the British read their most secret communications with increasing efficiency. The impact extended far beyond individual tactical engagements. Ultra-intelligence allowed the Allies to measure precisely the effectiveness of anti-submarine warfare techniques, assess the damage inflicted on U-boats, and track the movement of reinforcements and supplies. It provided strategic insight into German naval planning and revealed the limitations of submarine operations. Most crucially, it transformed the convoy system. Rather than merely providing escorts for merchant vessels, Allied naval commanders could now route convoys specifically to avoid U-boat concentrations. The mathematics of the convoy system, how many escorts were needed, what formations provided optimal protection, which routes minimized risk, were all recalculated based on precise knowledge of enemy positions. This intelligence advantage helped overcome Germany's impressive construction program. The German shipyards were producing new U-boats at an unprecedented rate, with 31 new submarines delivered in the first 6 months of 1942 alone. Without ultra-intelligence, this industrial achievement might have won the Battle of the Atlantic for Germany. Instead, the Allied ability to read Enigma traffic ensured that new U-boats were often sailing directly into traps. The mathematics of attrition turned inexorably against Germany, despite their industrial efforts. The human drama behind these statistics played out daily in the cramped confines of submarines and the tense operations rooms of escort vessels. U-boat crews, once celebrated as heroes of the Reich, found themselves increasingly on the defensive, hunted by aircraft and warships that seemed to appear with uncanny precision. Lieutenant Werner Herzer, serving aboard U-459, wrote in his diary in August 1942, "Something has changed. The British escorts seem to know exactly where to find us. We no longer hunt, we hide. The proud wolves have become frightened foxes." This transformation in the nature of submarine warfare occurred without the Germans understanding its true cause. Throughout 1942 and into 1943, Dönitz and his staff developed increasingly elaborate explanations for Allied success: improved radar, better sonar, enhanced aircraft capabilities, even the theory that the Allies had developed devices that could detect a submarine's exhaust gases. The mathematics of cryptanalysis remained invisible to them, even as it systematically dismantled their naval strategy. The German failure to recognize this vulnerability stemmed partly from their absolute faith in Enigma's complexity, and partly from their underestimation of Allied technical and analytical capabilities. The scale of the Bletchley Park operation by late 1942 would have astonished German intelligence officers. Over 5,000 people worked at the facility, with thousands more at Y stations and other supporting installations. The initial handful of Bombes had grown to nearly 200 machines, operating around the clock to process intercepts. The operation had industrialized intelligence production. Intercepts arrived continuously from listening stations. Teams of analysts worked in shifts, processing decrypted messages and distributing intelligence to military commands through secure channels. The entire system functioned with factory-like efficiency, transforming encrypted German messages into actionable intelligence within hours or even minutes of transmission. This industrialization of code-breaking represented a fundamental shift in warfare. Intelligence was no longer an artisanal product created by individual agents and analysts. It had become a mass-produced commodity, generated at industrial scale and distributed through systematic processes. The Germans, still conceptualizing intelligence in pre-war terms, failed to grasp this transformation. They continued to believe that their mathematical encryption system provided absolute security, unaware that the British had developed both the theoretical insights and industrial capacity to overcome it. By the end of 1942, the strategic balance in the Atlantic had shifted decisively. Allied shipping losses, while still significant, had declined dramatically from their peak. The happy time for U-boat commanders had ended. The mathematical certainty of German communication security had been silently, invisibly undermined. The revelation, when it finally came, would arrive too late to alter the outcome of the war. February 1st, 1943, U-boat headquarters, Cournevel, France. Admiral Karl Dönitz stood before the large Atlantic wall map, studying the increasingly troubling pattern of submarine losses. January had been catastrophic, 15 U-boats lost, the worst month of the war. More disturbing than the raw numbers was the pattern. Boats were being destroyed in areas where no Allied convoys had been reported, often while en route to their patrol zones or at predetermined refueling rendezvous points. For the first time, Dönitz allowed himself to consider what had previously been unthinkable: the possibility that Enigma had been compromised. He summoned his signals security officer, Lieutenant Commander Heinz Bonatz. "I want a complete review of our cipher security," Dönitz ordered. "Examine every possibility, no matter how unlikely." Bonatz conducted a thorough investigation, questioning radio operators, reviewing procedures, and consulting with cryptographic experts. His report, delivered on February 15th, was reassuring. The mathematical security of Enigma remains absolute. No technical means exist that could break our encryption within any operationally relevant time frame. This assessment, while mathematically sound based on German understanding of cryptanalysis, failed to account for the revolutionary approach developed at Bletchley Park. The Germans continued to think of code breaking in traditional terms, human analysts working with pencil and paper. They had no concept of the electromechanical bombs or the systematic industrial approach the British had developed. Nevertheless, Dönitz instituted additional security measures. The most significant was the introduction of a new, more complex version of the Kriegsmarine cipher, nicknamed Shark by Allied cryptanalysts. This change temporarily blinded Bletchley Park from December 1942 until March 1943, a period German submariners called the Second Happy Time, as their success rates against convoys temporarily improved. The mathematical arms race between cryptographers and cryptanalysts intensified. Bletchley Park responded with more sophisticated bombes and new analytical techniques. By March 1943, they had overcome the challenge of the new German cipher systems. The window of German advantage closed, never to reopen. What followed was one of the most decisive months in the Battle of the Atlantic. In March 1943, Allied convoys faced 42 different U-boat attacks. Despite this pressure, only 21 merchant vessels were lost, while an unprecedented 17 U-boats were destroyed. The mathematics of this exchange rate proved devastating for the German submarine fleet. For the first time, they were losing submarines faster than German shipyards could replace them. More significantly, they were losing experienced crews who couldn't be readily replaced. May 24, 1943, marked the turning point. On that day, Dönitz wrote in his war diary, "We have lost the Battle of the Atlantic." The German admiral didn't yet understand the full reason for his defeat. He attributed it primarily to improved Allied radar, air coverage, and escort tactics. While these factors were significant, the critical advantage remained hidden. Allied commanders knew where U-boats would be before they arrived. The true scale of this intelligence advantage remained one of the war's most closely guarded secrets. Even Allied naval officers receiving ultra-intelligence weren't told its source. Information was carefully sanitized and often attributed to conventional reconnaissance to protect the Enigma secret. This secrecy proved effective. Despite mounting evidence that their communications were compromised, German leadership continued to trust the mathematical security of Enigma throughout the war. This faith persisted even as the operational evidence of compromise became increasingly difficult to ignore. June 17, 1943, Mediterranean Sea, north of Sicily. Lieutenant Commander Fritz Julius Lemp, one of Germany's most successful U-boat aces with 17 ships to his credit, had been ordered to patrol off the coast of Sicily in preparation for the expected Allied invasion. His submarine, U-385, had departed Toulon 3 days earlier, with orders to attack Allied shipping supporting the invasion force. What Lemp didn't know was that Bletchley Park had decrypted the orders sent to him. His patrol route, schedule, and operational parameters were known to Allied naval intelligence before his submarine cleared the harbor. At 4:17 in the morning, as U-385 cruised on the surface to charge batteries, HMS Ness, a British sloop specifically positioned to intercept the submarine, made radar contact. The British vessel closed rapidly, surprising the U-boat on the surface. The German submarine managed to crash dive, but depth charges from HMS Ness found their mark. U-385 was lost with all hands, another victim of the invisible cryptographic war that was systematically destroying the German submarine fleet. This pattern repeated with devastating efficiency throughout the summer of 1943. U-boats were being hunted with unprecedented precision. Allied aircraft and escort vessels seemed to materialize exactly where submarines were operating, often catching them on the surface before they could dive to safety. The human cost was staggering. Of the 40,000 German submariners who served during World War II, 28,000 would die, a 70% casualty rate higher than any other service branch on either side. The majority of these losses occurred after Allied cryptanalysts gained consistent access to naval Enigma communications. By late 1943, the German submarine fleet had been effectively neutralized as a strategic threat. Allied shipping losses fell to levels that could be easily replaced by American and British shipyards. The mathematical equation of the Atlantic campaign had shifted decisively. While the Battle of the Atlantic demonstrated the impact of ultra-intelligence most dramatically, the breaking of Enigma affected every theater of the war. On land, in the air, and at sea, German operations were compromised at the highest level. November 11th, 1943, Wolf's Lair, East Prussia. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, recently returned from North Africa, met with Adolf Hitler to discuss the expected Allied invasion of France. Rommel had been tasked with strengthening the Atlantic Wall defenses, and he brought a disturbing observation to the Führer's attention. My analysis of the North African campaign suggests that the Allies had advanced knowledge of our movements and supply schedules, Rommel stated. Time after time, they seemed to anticipate our operations before they began. Hitler dismissed these concerns, attributing Allied success to conventional intelligence sources and Rommel's own operational patterns. The possibility that Enigma had been compromised remained unthinkable at the highest levels of German leadership, yet the evidence continued to mount. Throughout 1943 and 1944, German forces across all fronts experienced the same pattern. Allied operations that seemed to anticipate their movements, ambushes that appeared precisely where German units were traveling, and bombing raids that struck targets immediately after they were mentioned in encrypted communications. The impact on land warfare was profound. In North Africa, ultra-intelligence had allowed the British to intercept Rommel's supply convoys with devastating precision. In Italy, Allied forces repeatedly outmaneuvered German defensive positions. In France, the elaborate deception operations surrounding the D-Day landings were crafted specifically around intelligence gleaned from Enigma decrypts. The mathematics of battlefield advantage had fundamentally changed. Traditional calculations of force ratios, firepower, and tactical position were now secondary to the information advantage created by signals intelligence. Armies that believed their communication secure made decisions that became immediately transparent to their enemies. Despite mounting evidence, German security experts continued to insist that Enigma remained mathematically unbreakable. In a report dated April 1944, the Reich Main Security Office stated, "Based on exhaustive analysis, we can state with absolute certainty that the current encryption systems used by our armed forces cannot be cryptanalytically compromised by any known method." This assessment reflected not just overconfidence, but a fundamental misunderstanding of how Bletchley Park had approached the problem. The Germans continued to conceptualize code-breaking as a purely mathematical challenge, requiring brute force testing of all possible combinations. They failed to grasp the revolutionary analytical shortcuts and mechanized testing that Turing and his colleagues had developed. June 6, 1944, Normandy, France. As Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, they did so with an unprecedented advantage. Detailed knowledge of German defenses, troop positions, and reinforcement capabilities derived from Enigma decrypts. Ultra-intelligence had revealed which beaches were less heavily defended, which German units were stationed nearby, and how quickly they could respond. More significantly, the elaborate deception plan, Operation Fortitude, that convinced German leadership the main invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy, was crafted specifically around insights from decrypted German communications. Allied planners knew exactly what information would convince German intelligence that Normandy was merely a diversion. The German response to the landings was hampered by confusion and conflicting orders, confusion that Allied commanders could monitor in real time through decrypted communications. When German armor finally began moving toward the beachhead, Allied aircraft and naval gunfire were waiting, having been directed to key choke points identified through ultra-intelligence. The invasion's success, while dependent on the courage of Allied soldiers and the material superiority of the invasion force, was significantly enhanced by the cryptographic advantage established years earlier at Bletchley Park. The mathematics of Enigma, once considered the ultimate guarantee of German communication security, had become the greatest vulnerability in their defense of Fortress Europe. As Allied forces pushed inland from the Normandy beaches, ultra-intelligence continued to provide critical advantages. German troop movements, supply convoys, and reinforcement schedules were all compromised. Allied air power could be directed with surgical precision against key targets identified through decrypted communications. The impact on German military effectiveness was devastating. Units would be ordered to assemble at specific locations, only to find Allied artillery pre-registered on those exact coordinates. Ammunition and fuel dumps mentioned in encrypted messages would be bombed before supplies could be distributed. Reinforcements would arrive at assembly points to find Allied forces waiting in ambush. This intelligence advantage accelerated the collapse of German forces in France. What German leadership had expected to be a prolonged, grinding campaign became a headlong retreat as Allied forces consistently outmaneuvered their opponents. By August 1944, Paris had been liberated, and German forces were in full retreat toward the Rhine. Throughout this period, German communication security experts continued to investigate the possibility of Enigma compromise. Their investigations focused primarily on physical security, the possibility that codebooks or actual Enigma machines had been captured, rather than cryptanalytic attacks on the system itself. These investigations led to further security measures. Additional complexity was added to encryption procedures. Frequencies were changed more regularly. Message lengths were shortened to provide less material for analysis. But the fundamental faith in Enigma's mathematical security remained unshaken. This misplaced confidence ensured that German forces continued to rely on radio communications encrypted with a system their enemies could read. The mathematics of their defeat was being calculated daily at Bletchley Park, where the industrial-scale code-breaking operation had reached unprecedented efficiency. By late 1944, Bletchley Park employed nearly 10,000 people. The original handful of Bombes had grown to over 200 machines, processing intercepts around the clock. New, even more powerful computing devices, particularly the Colossus computers designed to break the Germans' Lorenz cipher, had been developed, representing the birth of the electronic computing age. This massive code-breaking operation remained one of the war's most closely guarded secrets. The personnel at Bletchley Park operated under strict secrecy orders, forbidden to discuss their work, even with family members. The facility itself was disguised as a radio research station, its true purpose known only to a handful of senior Allied leaders. The scale and success of the operation remained hidden from the Germans until long after the war had ended. Despite mounting evidence that their communications were compromised, they never identified the true source of their vulnerability. November 2nd, 1944. Reich Security Main Office, Berlin. SS General Ernst Kaltenbrunner, head of the Reich Security Main Office, received a comprehensive report on German communication security. The investigation had been ordered after a series of Allied operations that suggested detailed foreknowledge of German plans. The report considered various possibilities: spies within the German High Command, captured codebooks, radar-based tracking of German units. The possibility of cryptanalytic compromise was discussed but dismissed as mathematically impossible. The report concluded, while individual security breaches cannot be ruled out, systematic compromise of our main cipher systems remains technically unfeasible given the mathematical complexity of Enigma encryption. This assessment, delivered less than 6 months before Germany's surrender, demonstrated how completely the Reich had misunderstood the technological and analytical revolution that had occurred at Bletchley Park. The Germans continued to believe that their mathematical encryption system was unbreakable, even as it was being routinely deciphered by their enemies. The cost of this misunderstanding can be measured in the final statistics of the war. In the Battle of the Atlantic alone, Allied knowledge of U-boat positions derived from Enigma decrypts contributed directly to the destruction of over 200 German submarines. On the Eastern Front, ultra-intelligence provided critical advantages to Soviet forces pushing toward Berlin. In the air war, bomber streams could be directed precisely against targets identified through signals intelligence. Modern estimates suggest that the breaking of Enigma shortened the war by between 2 and 4 years. This acceleration saved countless lives that would have been lost in a prolonged conflict and prevented the further destruction of European infrastructure and society. April 30th, 1945, Berlin, Germany. As Soviet forces closed in on the Reich Chancellery, the final collapse of Nazi Germany was at hand. In the underground bunker where Hitler would commit suicide later that day, communication staff continued to send and receive messages encrypted with Enigma machines, still believing in the mathematical security of their systems. To the very end, German leadership failed to recognize that their most secret communications had been an open book to their enemies. This failure stemmed from a fundamental misconception about the nature of cryptographic security. The Germans had approached encryption as a mathematical problem with a mathematical solution. They calculated the astronomical number of possible Enigma settings and concluded that systematic testing of these combinations was impossible within any operational time frame. What they failed to understand was that Turing and his colleagues had changed the nature of the problem. Through mathematical insights, mechanical computation, and exploitation of procedural weaknesses, they had transformed an apparently impossible task into a solvable one. This transformation represented more than just a tactical or strategic advantage. It marked the birth of the computer age. The machines developed at Bletchley Park to break Enigma were the direct ancestors of modern computers. The conceptual frameworks created to analyze encrypted communications evolved into information theory and computer science. May 7th, 1945, Reims, France. As German representatives signed the instrument of surrender at Allied headquarters, the Enigma secret remained intact. Allied leaders had determined that the cryptanalytic breakthrough was too valuable to reveal. Even with the European war concluded, Japanese communication systems were still being targeted, and the Cold War was already on the horizon. The personnel of Bletchley Park were dispersed, sworn to secrecy about their wartime work. The bombs and other specialized computing equipment were dismantled or repurposed. Documentation was sealed or destroyed. For nearly 30 years, one of the most significant intelligence achievements in military history remained hidden from public knowledge. This secrecy had significant consequences. The mathematicians, engineers, and analysts who had pioneered computing at Bletchley Park could not publicly claim credit for their innovations. The British computer industry, which might have dominated the field given its wartime head start, was unable to capitalize on these classified advances. When the Enigma story was finally revealed in the 1970s, it transformed our understanding of World War II. Operations that had seemed to result from tactical brilliance or lucky guesses were revealed to have been guided by precise intelligence. The wizard war of technology and counterintelligence took on new significance as the cryptographic dimension became known. For the German veterans who learned of Enigma's compromise decades after the war, the revelation came as a profound shock. Admiral Karl Dönitz, who survived the war and served 10 years in prison for war crimes, learned the truth in 1974. His reaction was recorded by an interviewer. "If this is true, it explains everything." The mathematics of Enigma had promised absolute security. The 3 rotors of the Standard Army and Air Force machine created 159 quintillion possible settings, a number so vast that even modern computers would require years to test every combination. The naval Enigma, with its 4th rotor, was even more secure. Yet this apparent mathematical certainty had been overcome through a combination of brilliant analysis, mechanical computation, and systematic exploitation of human procedural errors. The lesson was clear. No encryption system is stronger than its implementation. The Enigma story revolutionized our understanding of cryptography and information security. Modern encryption systems are designed with the knowledge that mathematical complexity alone is insufficient. The entire cryptographic ecosystem, including human operators, must be secure. Beyond its technical significance, the breaking of Enigma represented a pivotal moment in warfare. For the first time, intelligence derived from signals interception and cryptanalysis became as decisive as traditional military factors like firepower, manpower, and tactical skill. The mathematics of warfare had fundamentally changed. Equations calculating the trajectory of artillery shells were now matched in importance by algorithms analyzing encrypted communications. Information itself had become a weapon as powerful as any in the traditional arsenal. This transformation continues to shape modern conflict. Today's military operations depend on secure communications and the ability to compromise enemy systems. The conceptual foundations of this approach were established at Bletchley Park between 1939 and 1945. The human story behind this mathematical revolution is equally significant. The codebreakers of Bletchley Park came from diverse backgrounds: mathematicians, linguists, chess champions, crossword experts, classicists, and engineers. They included women like Joan Clark and Mavis Lever, who made critical contributions at a time when women were largely excluded from technical fields. Alan Turing, whose conceptual breakthrough made the industrialized breaking of Enigma possible, received little recognition during his lifetime. His prosecution for homosexuality in 1952 and subsequent suicide in 1954 stand as a tragic counterpoint to his wartime achievements. When Turing's role was finally acknowledged decades later, it transformed our understanding of his place in history. Beyond his wartime code-breaking, his theoretical work laid the foundation for modern computer science. The Turing machine concept established the fundamental principles upon which all computing is based. The ultimate legacy of the Enigma story extends far beyond its impact on World War II. It represents the moment when humanity crossed a threshold into the information age, when the ability to process and analyze data at unprecedented scale transformed our relationship with information itself. German security experts had believed the mathematics of Enigma made it unbreakable. They calculated that testing all possible settings would require more time than the universe had existed. What they failed to anticipate was that mathematics itself would provide the solution, that analytical insights combined with mechanical computation would render their apparently unassailable encryption vulnerable. This transformation from absolute confidence to catastrophic compromise unfolded without the Germans ever fully grasping what had happened. Their faith in the mathematical security of Enigma remained unshaken, even as it led them to devastating defeats on land, at sea, and in the air. The irony is profound. The German military, which prided itself on technical excellence and methodical planning, was undone by its failure to recognize a technological revolution. The mathematicians and engineers of Bletchley Park had fundamentally changed the rules of the cryptographic game. But their German counterparts continued to play by the old rules until defeat was complete. In 1974, when Prime Minister Winston Churchill's wartime science advisor Lord Cherwell was asked about the significance of breaking Enigma, he replied, "It was decisive. Without it, I don't know how the war could have been won." This assessment, while perhaps overstated, captures an essential truth. The breaking of Enigma represented a turning point not just in World War II, but in the evolution of warfare itself. The cryptographic advantage gained at Bletchley Park accelerated Allied victory, saved countless lives, and ushered in the age of information warfare that continues to shape global conflict today. The transformation from German confidence in Enigma's mathematical security to the reality of its systematic compromise represents one of history's most consequential technological miscalculations. The encryption system that promised absolute security had instead become the greatest vulnerability in the German war machine. Admiral Dönitz, reflecting on this revelation decades after the war, offered perhaps the most fitting epitaph for the Enigma story. "We believed the laws of mathematics made our communications impenetrable. What we did not understand was that our enemies had written new laws."